The great hall of the alien empire was filled with light, sound, and color unlike anything a human eye had ever seen. Towering pillars shimmered as if they were alive, carved from crystals that pulsed softly with energy. The nobles of the queen's court stood tall, their silver armor catching the glow, their gazes sharp as blades. At the center of it all sat Queen Seraphina, a figure of grace and strength. Her crown was not of gold, but of woven light, and her presence commanded silence even in a hall that never truly quieted. Into this world, so different and so distant from his own, had come Ethan, a man not meant to be there, at least in the eyes of many. He was human, and to the aliens of Seraphina's empire, humans were stories told in half-belief, creatures too fragile to matter in wars or politics. Some whispered that humans were weak, others laughed that they belonged to the past, not the future. And yet here Ethan stood, alive, walking the marble floor of the Queen's court. His presence was no accident. Months earlier he had been found half-broken on a battlefield far from Earth, a forgotten soldier among wreckage. The alien soldiers, following Seraphina's command, had taken him in. Many had argued against it, saying a human was not worth saving. But Seraphina had given no explanation, only the order. Bring him. It was a decision that puzzled the court, and now, as he stood tall despite his scars, the whispers only grew louder. Ethan was no warrior in their eyes. He had no armor that shone, no strength that seemed beyond mortal, yet he carried himself with a strange dignity, a steadiness that made even those who mocked him pause. His gaze did not wander like one overwhelmed by riches or fear. Instead, his eyes met theirs with calmness, a quiet strength that needed no shouting to be heard. Seraphina watched him with interest from her throne. She was used to men and women who bowed low, who spoke in honeyed tones, who fought for her favor with flattery or gifts. But Ethan stood differently. He neither begged for attention nor tried to impress. He was simply present, and somehow that drew her more than any elaborate speech could. Still, the court was not kind. When he walked past, some of the nobles smirked, whispering words they thought he would not understand. Fragile, they said. Short-lived. What use is he to our queen? Their voices were sharp, their laughter biting. Ethan did not respond. He had been mocked before, back on Earth, when he was just a soldier among stronger men. Silence, he had learned, often cut deeper than words. Despite the distance between them, Seraphina found herself studying the human more often than she admitted. She had ruled for many years, seen countless warriors, scholars, and diplomats pass through her court. All had something to prove, something to demand. Ethan alone seemed to ask for nothing. It was as if he had already accepted who he was, and that acceptance was something rare even among her own kind. But in the quiet corners of the palace, the truth spread in whispers. The nobles were not just curious, they were restless. They did not understand why the queen allowed the human to remain in her presence. Some feared it made her look weak, as if she pitied a lesser creature. Others suspected she had some hidden reason, perhaps a strategy unknown to them. Whatever the case, the man's existence in their world stirred unease. Ethan, however, did not trouble himself with their doubts. He spent his days observing, learning the ways of the alien empire. The city outside the palace was vast, filled with lights that danced in the night and towers that seemed to touch the sky. He walked among them, often watched but rarely spoken to. Children pointed at him with curiosity, their eyes wide at the sight of a human they had only heard about in stories. He smiled at them, even when their parents pulled them back, afraid to let them near. At night, he often stood on the balcony of his chamber, staring at the stars. They were different from the ones he had known on Earth, yet beautiful in their own way. Sometimes he wondered if he would ever see home again. Other times he thought of how strange it was that life had brought him here, standing in a world where even breathing the air felt like a reminder of his difference. But Ethan was not the kind of man to dwell on despair. He had survived battles, losses, and loneliness. This too he would endure. The queen herself noticed this resilience. She asked him questions when the court allowed quiet moments, about his world, his people, his wars. He answered with honesty, never hiding the flaws of humanity, never painting himself as more than what he was. She respected that. Too many of her own courtiers twisted truth to make themselves appear greater. Ethan, in his simple words, showed more honor than most of them combined, and so a strange balance grew between them. The queen, ruler of thousands, and the human, a stranger in her land. Their connection was not yet clear even to themselves, but it was there, a thread invisible to others, binding them slowly, silently. Yet beyond the crystal pillars and glowing halls, danger stirred. Enemies of the queen plotted in shadows, seeking ways to strike where she least expected. Some looked at Ethan as nothing more than a distraction, an easy weakness to exploit. They could not see the quiet fire within him, nor could they predict what he would one day do. For now, Ethan was simply the outsider, the human in a world that doubted him. But fate was already moving, preparing a moment that would test him, and prove whether he was truly as fragile as they believed, or something far greater. The grand hall was alive with celebration that day. The queen's court had gathered in their finest armor and flowing robes. Banners of light drifted across the tall pillars, glowing in shifting colors, and music played from instruments that shimmered with energy. It was a ceremony of honor, meant to show the strength of the empire and the unshakable presence of Queen Seraphina. Her people stood tall with pride, their voices carrying in songs that filled the space. Ethan stood among them, a quiet figure dressed in simple garments compared to the shining robes of the nobles. He was not there to celebrate as they were. He was there because Seraphina had asked it of him. Though many looked at him with suspicion, he stood calmly, hands behind his back, observing the grand gathering. He felt the weight of hundreds of eyes on him, some filled with curiosity, some with cold judgment. Yet he did not lower his head. At the center, Queen Seraphina moved with her usual grace. She walked past her people, speaking with her nobles, listening to the voices of her warriors, acknowledging their victories. Every movement she made carried power, every word she spoke carried respect. Yet she did not miss the glances sent toward Ethan. She knew they doubted him, wondered why he remained close. A small smile touched her lips when she saw how steady he stood, not shifting under the stairs. The ceremony was reaching its peak. A circle of guards formed around the queen as she stepped forward to give her speech. The air grew quiet, waiting for her voice. She raised her hand to speak, her crown glowing with soft light, her presence commanding silence. Her words were just beginning when the air changed. It happened in an instant, faster than thought. A sharp whistle cut through the hall, the sound of something slicing the air. From the shadows above, an arrow shot forward, glowing faintly with a sickly green. It was no ordinary weapon. Its tip glistened with a poison known to her people, a poison that killed within moments. The arrow was aimed directly at Seraphina's heart. The guards reacted too slowly. They turned, some shouting warnings, some rushing forward, but none could reach her in time. For a single breath, it seemed nothing could stop the deadly strike. But Ethan moved. Without thinking, without hesitation, he stepped into the path of the arrow. His body twisted, his arm rising as if guided by instinct alone. The weapon struck him instead of the queen, burying into the flesh of his shoulder. The sound echoed through the chamber, the sharp impact, the gasp of the crowd. Ethan staggered, pain searing through his body. But he did not fall. He clenched his jaw, standing firm, though his arm burned as the poison began its cruel work. The queen's eyes widened, shock flashing across her face. She had seen many warriors in her life, seen countless sacrifices, but never had anyone shielded her in such a way, least of all a human. Chaos erupted. Guards shouted, racing to find the assassin. Some leapt into the air, searching the shadows. Others closed in around Seraphina and Ethan. The nobles cried out in panic, their proud voices breaking into fear. The sound of boots thundered across the marble floor, weapons drawn. But the queen's focus was not on the noise. It was on Ethan. She stepped down from her dais, her robe flowing behind her as she moved quickly to his side. Her hand reached for him, steadying his arm as his breathing grew uneven. "You should not have done that," she said, her voice low, almost trembling, though her face remained strong. Ethan looked at her through the pain, sweat gathering on his brow. His voice came rough but steady. "I couldn't stand by and watch you fall." His words were simple, but they carried a weight that silenced even her doubts. The healers were summoned at once. They rushed to Ethan, their hands glowing with energy as they tried to draw out the poison. The crowd watched in silence now, the fear of moments ago turning into disbelief. Whispers spread quickly. The human saved her. He stood in front of the queen. The poison was strong. Ethan's vision blurred, his strength fading as the alien medicine fought to keep him alive. He had faced wounds before, he had known pain, but this was different. It was as though fire ran through his veins. Yet even as his body weakened, his eyes did not leave Serafina. He held her gaze, refusing to show fear. She remained beside him as the healers worked, her hand never leaving his arm. Those watching could hardly believe it. The queen, who rarely showed emotion, standing so close to a human, her concern plain to see. For her, the crown meant power, but in that moment, she was not a ruler guarding her throne. She was simply a woman watching someone she had come to trust suffer for her sake. Hours passed as healers battled the poison with their skill. At last, they managed to save him, though his body would take time to recover. He was moved to a quiet chamber where he could rest, guarded closely not only by soldiers but by the queen's command. In the days that followed, the story spread through the empire. The human who had been mocked, the man so many had called weak, had shielded the queen with his own body. Nobles who once sneered at him now spoke his name with unease, and some even with respect. The people whispered his bravery in the markets, in the streets, in their homes. But for Serafina, the tale was not about whispers or respect. It was about the truth she had seen in his eyes as he stood before her, taking the arrow meant for her heart. He had no throne to protect, no empire to rule, no promise of reward. He had simply acted, and in that action, he had proven something no court ceremony could. From that day forward, Ethan was no longer just a guest in her palace. He was the man who had saved her life. And though the nobles tried to hide their unease, they could not deny it. The queen had chosen to keep him near, and now there was no one who dared say he did not belong. Ethan's chamber was quiet except for the faint hum of the palace walls. The alien healers had left after hours of care, leaving behind glowing herbs and jars of medicine unlike anything on earth. His arm was wrapped with shimmering cloth that pulsed softly, keeping the poison at bay. He lay on a wide bed, far more luxurious than any he had ever slept in, but comfort mattered little when his body ached with every breath. In the silence, footsteps echoed. They were light, graceful, but carried a weight of command. Queen Serafina entered, her robe trailing like a river of silver light. The guards at the door bowed deeply and closed it behind her, leaving only the two of them in the chamber. Ethan stirred, forcing himself to sit a little straighter, but she raised her, and stay, she said gently. It was the first time she had spoken to him with such softness. She moved closer, her eyes scanning his face, his bandaged shoulder, the exhaustion written across him. "Why?" she asked finally. "Why would you do that for me? You are human. You had no duty." Ethan looked at her, tired but calm. "I didn't think," he admitted. "I saw danger and I stepped in front of it. Anyone would have done the same." Her lips curved faintly, though her eyes remained steady. "No," she said, shaking her head. "Not anyone. Many of my own people would have thought first of themselves." That moment lingered between them, quiet but powerful. For the first time, Serafina felt something she rarely allowed herself: trust. She had trusted generals to follow orders, nobles to play their roles, soldiers to fight wars. But this man had acted not from duty, but from his heart. In the days that followed, she came often to his side. At first, she told herself it was duty, that she should check on the man who had saved her. Yet each time she found herself staying, longer than intended. They spoke of simple things, his home, her world, the stars above. Ethan spoke of Earth's forests, its oceans, its cities lit by neon lights. He told her of rain that smelled like the soil, of winds that carried the scent, of pine trees. She listened with genuine curiosity, imagining a world she had never seen. In return, Serafina shared her own stories. She told him of her first battle as queen, of the choices that had cost her sleep, of the loneliness of wearing a crown. She had never spoken such things aloud to anyone, not even her closest advisors. But with Ethan, the words slipped out, as if his presence untied knots she had carried for years. Sometimes they laughed. Ethan's humor was quiet but sharp, and Serafina found herself smiling more than she had in a long time. The sound of her laughter startled even her. She who was always the image of control, laughing like a woman free of burdens. It was something she had almost forgotten was possible. But outside that chamber, the court grew restless. The nobles noticed her absence from long meetings, her shortened conversations with them, her sudden habit of visiting the human daily. Whispers turned sharper. The queen favors him. She forgets her own people. Some even suggested that his presence was a weakness the empire could not afford. Ethan knew of these whispers. He saw the way courtiers looked at him when he walked the halls, some with open disdain, others with a hint of fear. But he ignored them. He had no interest in their politics, no desire for their approval. He had already chosen where his loyalty stood, and it was with the woman who had shown him kindness when she did not need to. One evening, Serafina entered his chamber later than usual. She seemed tired, her shoulders heavy with the weight of the crown. She sat across from him, her hands folded. For a long moment she was silent, as if searching for the right words. Finally she spoke. "They think you are dangerous to me. They think I am distracted." Ethan tilted his head slightly. "Are you?" She looked at him, her lips curving, in something between amusement and sadness. "Perhaps," she admitted, "but not in the way they fear. You do not weaken me, Ethan. You remind me of something I forgot long ago, that a ruler is also a person, that behind the crown is a heart." He held her gaze, quiet, thoughtful. "Then maybe they are right to be afraid," he said softly, "because a queen who remembers she has a heart is stronger than one who forgets." Her breath caught just for a moment at his words. No one in her court would dare speak to her like that. No one would dare remind her of what it meant to be more than a symbol. Yet this human, wounded and far from his own world, spoke to her not as a queen but as a woman. And somehow she found herself grateful for it. The bond between them deepened even if neither spoke of it aloud. They were drawn together by honesty, by moments of laughter, by silence that felt comfortable instead of heavy. The palace, still, whispered, still doubted, but within the quiet of his chamber none of that mattered. Ethan's strength slowly returned. He began walking again, his arm healing faster than expected under the care of alien medicine. Serafina sometimes walked with him through the palace gardens where glowing flowers opened at night, and streams of silver water wound between crystal stones. They spoke less in those walks, yet the silence felt like understanding. The people of the city began to notice too. When Ethan appeared beside their queen, no longer pale from poison but steady on his feet, they murmured among themselves. Some pointed, remembering the story of how he had shielded her. Others bowed their heads, in quiet respect. What had once been laughter and doubt was slowly becoming acknowledgement, but for Serafina it was simpler than politics or respect. It was the way her steps felt lighter when she walked with him. It was the way his voice, steady and calm, cut through the endless noise of her court. It was the way he looked at her, not as a ruler to be feared or obeyed, but as someone human in her own right. The empire still expected her to be strong, to be untouchable, to rule with the same iron certainty as her ancestors. But now, with Ethan close, she found she no longer needed to pretend to be only a queen. For the first time in many years, she could simply be Serafina, and though neither of them had spoken it aloud, the truth was already there, quiet, but undeniable. What had begun with a single act of courage, the moment Ethan stepped in front of a poisoned arrow, was becoming something deeper, something neither of them had planned. The queen had found her protector, and, without meaning to, she had also found someone she could no longer imagine being without. The court was restless more than usual, as whispers of rebellion stirred in hidden corners of the empire. Some nobles were displeased with the queen's favor toward a human, while others saw it as an opportunity to undermine her authority. Rumors spread like fire. Ethan was not just a guest, they said, but a spy, a manipulator, someone who could weaken Serafina's rule if given the chance. It was a tense time for both the queen and the human who had saved her life. Ethan noticed the tension, though he did not let it show. He had faced enemies before, on Earth and in the battlefield of politics. But this was different. The stakes were higher, the enemy invisible. He could see the distrust in the eyes of the nobles, hear it in the hushed tones of their voices, but he remained calm. He had no claim to power, no ambition for a throne. He only had loyalty, and loyalty, he knew, could be stronger than armies. One morning, Serafina approached him with a seriousness that made even the guards hold their breath. She had been observing the court, listening to the rumors, and she had reached a decision. "Ethan," she said, her voice steady, "if you wish to prove your loyalty to me and to this empire, there is a task I need you to do. It is dangerous, but it must be done." Ethan's brow furrowed. "What is it?" he asked. "There are remnants of the group that tried to kill me," she explained. "They still move in the shadows. They are planning another attack. You must find them. You must stop them before they strike again." He did not hesitate. "I will do it," he said. It was not bravado, it was simply truth. He had no fear, for himself. He only feared failure if it meant Serafina or her people could be harmed. Preparations began immediately. Ethan was given equipment unlike anything he had used before. Weapons that hummed with energy, tools that could detect movement, across miles devices that seemed alive. He trained with them, learning quickly, though some of the alien mechanisms were confusing at first. He was not used to such advanced technology, but his mind adapted as it always did. Days later, he set out into the shadowed parts of the empire, places where light barely reached, and danger waited at every turn. His mission was not just to track these conspirators, but to confront them directly if necessary. Each step he took carried risk, yet he moved forward with the same steady determination that had once led him to shield the queen from a poisoned arrow. The conspirators were cunning. They had hidden passages, secret meetings, and traps designed to catch even the most careful of intruders. Yet Ethan was cautious, observing patterns, predicting movements. He remembered his training, his instincts honed in battles long ago. Slowly he began to uncover their plans, discovering where they would strike next and who among the court had been manipulated to aid them. At last, he found them, hidden in a cavern beneath the city. The air was thick, almost suffocating, and shadows stretched across the walls like living creatures. The conspirators were armed and ready, expecting anyone who dared enter to fail. But Ethan was not intimidated. He moved swiftly, striking with precision, using both his human ingenuity and the alien weapons he had learned to wield. The battle was quiet, but fierce. He avoided traps, disarmed guards, and neutralized the threat without unnecessary destruction. By the time he emerged, the conspirators were captured or fled, their plan destroyed. The news traveled fast. Serafina's enemies within the court were forced to acknowledge that the human was no longer a weak outsider. He was someone who could act decisively, someone whose courage matched the strongest warriors of the empire. When he returned, Serafina met him at the palace gates. She looked at him, examining his clothes torn from the battle, his body tired, but his eyes steady. "You have done well," she said. More than well. You have proven yourself beyond any doubt. Ethan bowed slightly, though he was exhausted. I only did what was necessary, he replied. But Serafina shook her head, smiling faintly. No, you did more than necessary. You acted not for reward, not for glory, but for loyalty. That is rare. That is worth more than armies or titles. The court took notice too. Nobles who had doubted him whispered that the human had indeed saved the empire. They could not hide their respect even if they still struggled with disbelief. Some tried to argue that the queen had made a mistake in trusting him, but Serafina's voice silenced them. He has my trust, and that is enough. As the days passed, the bond between the queen and Ethan grew stronger. He no longer needed to prove himself in daily tasks, yet every moment with him reminded her of the courage and honor he carried. They began walking together in the gardens, speaking less of politics and more of life, of small joys, of laughter. She realized that she had not only found a protector in him, but someone who reminded her of the world beyond her throne, someone who reminded her of herself. The empire, however, was not without challenges. There were still plots, still dangers, that lingered in the shadows. But the knowledge that Ethan stood beside her gave Serafina a confidence she had never known. His presence was no longer simply protection. It was a symbol, a sign that loyalty and courage could come from unexpected places, even from a human once considered weak. And though neither of them spoke it aloud, the truth was clear. What had begun as a single act of courage, shielding her from a poisoned arrow, had become a bond forged in danger, trust, and respect. The court might murmur, and enemies might scheme, but the connection between the queen and the human was unshakable. They had faced trials together, and together they would face whatever came next. Ethan had proven that strength was not only in power or bloodlines, but in loyalty, courage, and the willingness to act when it mattered most. And Serafina, in choosing to trust him, had chosen not only a protector but someone who could stand beside her, not behind her, as an equal in heart if not in title. The Grand Council chamber was alive with tension. Nobles from across the empire had gathered, their robes and armor gleaming under the soft glow of the floating lights. Whispers carried through the hall like wind through the trees, each voice questioning, doubting, and wondering what the queen would decide. Queen Serafina entered with her usual poise, yet there was a softness in her eyes, a warmth that had begun to grow over months spent with Ethan. The human who had once been a stranger in her court now stood beside her, calm and composed, ready for whatever the council might demand. The murmurs grew louder as she approached the dais. Many wondered why she allowed a human, someone from a distant world, to stand so close to the ruler of their empire. Some thought it a mistake, others a bold move that challenged tradition. Yet the queen's gaze did not waver from Ethan. She had seen his courage, his loyalty, and his unwavering heart. To her, no words from the council mattered more than the truth she knew. He had proven himself in ways few could ever imagine. She raised her hand, and silence fell instantly. All eyes turned to her, the weight of authority heavy in the room. Today, she began, her voice strong but warm, we are gathered to discuss matters of the empire. Yet before any decision is made, I have something to declare. She paused, letting her words settle, her gaze drifting to Ethan. The chamber held its collective breath, waiting for the revelation that would surely change everything. Ethan stood quietly, his hands at his sides, his expression steady. He had long stopped seeking recognition or reward. He had acted out of loyalty and courage, not ambition. Yet now, as the queen spoke, he felt a mixture of anticipation and humility. He had never imagined that his life would lead him to this moment, standing beside a ruler of a world so different from his own. Serafina's voice rang clear, filling the chamber. Ethan, who has saved my life not once but twice, has proven himself more than capable of standing beside me. Today I choose him, not because of his origin, not because of what others may say, but because of the strength, courage, and loyalty he has shown. Gasps echoed through the hall. Nobles blinked in surprise, unsure how to respond. A human had been elevated in their empire, not through lineage or wealth, but through actions and heart. Some tried to hide their shock, others whispered quietly, but none could deny the truth of her words. Ethan, the outsider, had earned a place at her side. The queen continued, her eyes bright. Strength is not in bloodlines or crowns alone. Strength is in loyalty, in courage, in the willingness to act when it matters most. Ethan has shown all of this, and for that he has my choice. Ethan's breath caught. He had never sought power or position. He had simply acted when he saw danger, when he knew someone needed protection. And now, the queen had recognized him, not as a human outsider, but as someone worthy of trust, respect, and companionship. He bowed his head slightly, his voice quiet but sincere. "I am honored, Your Majesty. I will serve faithfully, as I always have." The queen smiled, stepping closer. "It is not service I seek, Ethan. It is your presence, your courage, and your heart. You have chosen to act without hesitation when it mattered most. Now I choose you." The council remained silent, the weight of the moment pressing on them. Some nobles looked uneasy, still adjusting to the idea of a human holding such favor. Others watched with awe, realizing that true courage could surpass tradition and expectation. Whispers of admiration began to ripple through the hall. Outside, the council chamber, the empire slowly began to take notice. Word spread of the queen's choice, and stories of Ethan's bravery became known in every city and village. People spoke of the human who had shielded their queen, who had uncovered plots, who had proven that courage and loyalty could bridge worlds. His story became a symbol of hope and strength, a reminder that heroism could come from the most unexpected places. In private moments, Serafina and Ethan walked together through the palace gardens. The glowing flowers and streams of silver water reflected their quiet joy. They spoke little, for words were not always necessary. The bond they had formed over months of shared danger, trust, and laughter was deeper than anything either had expected. She found comfort in his presence, and he found belonging in hers. The empire still faced challenges. There would always be plots, rebellions, and threats. But Serafina no longer faced them alone. Beside her stood a man whose courage had been proven not in words but in action, a man who had risked his life for hers, who had stood firm when others faltered, who had become a symbol of loyalty and strength. Their story became a legend, told and retold in hushed tones and proud voices alike. It was not simply a tale of a human saved by fate or a queen protected by chance. It was the story of courage, trust, and the power of choice. Serafina had chosen Ethan, and in doing so she had shown her empire that the heart, the will, and the bravery of one person could change everything. And as they stood together on the palace balcony, looking over the empire that stretched far beyond the horizon, neither of them needed to speak aloud what they felt. Their journey had brought them here through danger and doubt, to a place where choice, courage, and loyalty had united them. Side by side, they faced the future, not as ruler and subject, not as queen and outsider, but as equals bound by trust, respect, and the quiet, unspoken understanding that their lives had changed forever. The stars above the palace shone brighter than ever, reflecting in the pools of water below. Ethan, once a stranger in a distant world, now stood as the chosen companion of the queen. Serafina, once isolated by duty and crown, now found strength and warmth in the presence of the human who had risked everything for her. Together, they were more than legend. They were a living testament to courage, loyalty, and the bonds that could transcend worlds.